Well, there have been plenty of dramatic days in Washington over the past 12 months, and yesterday certainly joins that list. A one-time chairman of Donald Trump's campaign, Paul Manafort, was charged with illegal foreign lobbying, tax evasion and money laundering. Another campaign advisor, George Papadopoulos, pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. The developments relate to an ongoing investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. He's looking into alleged links between the Trump campaign and Russia. The White House has sought to distance the president from the charges, while Donald Trump himself said the focus should instead be on Hillary Clinton. Outside the court, Paul Manafort's lawyer described the charges as ridiculous.
There is no evidence that Mr. Manafort or the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government. Mr. Manafort represented pro-European Union campaigns for the Ukrainian. And in that, he was seeking to further democracy and to help the Ukraine come closer to the United States and the EU. Those activities ended in 2014, over 2 years before Mr. Manafort served in the Trump campaign.
Well, Bobby Chacon is a retired FBI agent, and he's been telling me about Robert Mueller's investigation.
Well, at its core, Robert Mueller was charged with investigating possible collusion between the Donald Trump campaign and certain high-level Russian officials in the Russian government during the lead up to the 2016 election in the United States.
Moving on then to this Paul Manafort indictment. Now, there had been a lot of speculation that this was coming, but how significant a development is it?
Well, sure, this was the worst kept secret in Washington, I think. And it's significant in the course of an investigation whenever you cross a threshold with an individual who, in this case, I think you hope cooperates with the investigation. So I think that it's significant in that it shows that the investigation is moving into the next phase. So prior to any charges being brought in an investigation, you sort out things and you look at who possibly you could look at and focus on to approach for someone who might cooperate with an investigation, because it's always better and to have an insider who's cooperating and can explain things, how they worked and what was going on. So I think in this case, because Paul Manafort was under investigation as early back as 2014, I think that there was a body of evidence already amassed against him, even though no charges had been brought, that the investigators simply picked up that old case file and refreshed some of the evidence, looked harder at some of the issues to see if they could bring charges against him. And then they probably approached him sometime in the past few weeks or months about cooperating before they actually charged him. It looks to me like he then turned them down on that offer. And that's speculation on my part as an investigator. But he probably turned them down. And so they now indicted him, brought charges on those old charges. Now, it should be understood that none of these charges brought today do connect to the initial aim of the investigation. That is, none of these charges relate to the Trump campaign in 2016 and any kind of access it had to the Russian officials. These are old charges that were investigated several years ago that have now been refreshed and Manafort's charge. It would surprise me also if there isn't currently still an offer on the table for Manafort to cooperate in exchange for maybe some of these charges being lessened.
As you say, the White House has been very keen to point out that all of this was before Paul Manafort had anything to do with Donald Trump's campaign. On the other hand, others have said that at the very least it raises questions about the president's judgment.
Well, sure, and I think that that's political posturing on the part of the White House to point that out. I mean, it is factual, but it is, I think, a little bit of posturing because it does show that here are charges that have been investigated and kind of shelved. They were put on the shelf last year, and until Manafort became involved in the Trump administration, or the Trump campaign actually, then they were brought back in front and looked at again, which means that they're looking at Manafort with these charges. They're still looking for him, I think, to cooperate in the collusion investigation. And so the White House obviously doesn't want to think about that eventuality, and they don't want to acknowledge that. But I think that as an investigator looking in from the outside, that's probably what they're doing.
This brings us on to George Papadopoulos. Now, unlike Paul Manafort, his isn't a well-known name. He has pleaded guilty to making false statements to FBI agents. What is it that he's admitted to doing?
Well, that's just it. He's admitted to lying about some of his contacts with people in Russia and trying to establish a link between those individuals and people in the Trump campaign. So he lied about that. And now he's admitting that he had and he didn't have actual direct access to these government officials, but he had access to certain professors that he knew in the academic world who then had access to these government officials, or at least claimed to. And so what he did was he volunteered for the Trump campaign, and he's a very young man, and I think he was trying to oversell his influence. And he then told people in the Trump campaign that he had connections with people in Russia that could possibly have dirt on Hillary Clinton and things like that. And I think they pursued that to some degree. I think when he was brought in earlier in the summer, he denied doing any of that. And they ultimately presented him with evidence that they knew he had, and he admitted to lying about it. So that's what he's been charged with, lying about his relationships and his telling of the FBI. And in fact, it's U.S. Code 1001 makes it a specific crime to lie to the FBI in certain situations like this. So that's what he's been charged with. The bigger significance of him is he's been cooperating in secret since July. And so what have they had him do as a cooperator? In my investigations, when I had somebody like him that nobody knew was cooperating, I would sometimes have him wear a wire and go into meet with certain people and try to record certain conversations. So I don't know that what they've done with him since July, since it was a secret and it's still under seal. But I think that the big thing to me, the value of him, was whatever he has done since July till now. Now that he's out in the open and everybody knows, no one will go near him. But what he's been doing since July in secret for the government is something that down the road we may find out.
Is it safe to imagine then that there could be people within White House circles thinking about their contacts with this man over the past few months, trying to remember if they had a conversation, and if they did, what it was that they spoke about?
Rachel, that's absolutely true. I think that there may be some nervous people who are scratching their heads and looking back at their call lists and things like that to see, exactly when they call. They're trying to figure out when he started cooperating with the government and what he's been doing the last couple of months. So yes, I believe that some of that may be taking place. Now, if he was a valuable cooperator, then the government's hope or the investigators' hope is that nobody kind of knew and that he was able to operate freely. But now that it's out in the open, I imagine that there are people that are scrambling to see how much damage he might have done in the last couple of months while he was cooperating.
Where, in your view, is this investigation likely to go from here?
I think that rests tonight with Paul Manafort and his attorneys. I think his attorneys now are assessing the indictment and the case against him, and what offers the government is making possibly to him. So I think that the direction of this investigation is going to depend on Paul Manafort and whether he decides to cooperate with the government. If he doesn't, I think they took their shot with Papadopoulos, so I think it was a much lower level player. This is taking a shot at Manafort now and trying to get him to come on board. And I think that it's really dependent on that. If he does decide to do that, and decides to cooperate and testify against certain individuals, then that's the way the investigation is going to go. If not, I'm not sure what else they have. They may have plenty of other things, but this is a big step in the investigation to put pressure on Manafort to cooperate. And if he does, then obviously it takes the turn where now you have somebody that was key and high level inside the Trump campaign, at least for a couple of months in 2016, that is now going to kind of be able to testify against other people, particularly against people like Jared Kushner and Trump Jr., who were with Manafort at that meeting in June with the Russian officials.
And that was Bobby Chacon, who spent 27 years working for the FBI. Within the past few minutes, by the way, Russia's Interfax news agency has reported some comments from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He says allegations of Russian meddling in US and European elections are fantasies.